10 African-American sisters faced being torn apart forever. When they met the old white farmer who wanted to adopt them all, social services couldn't believe what he revealed about his past. James Wilson's boots crunched on the frost-covered grass as he walked toward his barn at 5 a.m. The February air bit at his exposed face, and his breath came out in white puffs. He'd been doing this same walk for 40 years, but the last 6 months felt different. Emptier. He pulled the barn door open, wincing at the familiar squeak he still hadn't fixed. Sarah would have reminded him about that squeak every morning until he'd done something about it. But Sarah wasn't here anymore. "Morning, girl," he said to his old brown cow, Betty. She let out a low moo in response. The sound echoed in the half-empty barn that used to house 8 cows. He'd had to sell most of them after Sarah got sick. The medical bills had eaten through their savings faster than termites through old wood. James grabbed the milk bucket and his stool, settling into the familiar routine. His joints creaked as he sat down. 6 to 5 ain't what it used to be, he muttered. Betty swished her tail, catching him across the face. Yeah, I know. Less talking, more milking. The rhythm of milk hitting the metal bucket filled the quiet morning. James let his mind wander to the day ahead. He needed to check the winter wheat. Last week's frost hadn't looked good for the crops. Then there was the county fair to prepare for. His organic produce stand was one of the few things still turning a profit, even if it was smaller than before. After finishing with Betty, James headed to the wheat field. The morning sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across his land. 15 acres, it wasn't much compared to the industrial farms around him, but it had been enough for him and Sarah. He knelt down to examine the wheat stalks, his weathered hands gentle against the frozen plants. "Damn," he whispered. The frost damage was worse than he'd feared. At least half the crop was lost. He stood up slowly, his knee protesting the movement, and looked out across his field. Another bad harvest would make things tight. Real tight. The sound of a car engine drew his attention to the dirt road leading to his house. His neighbor, Tom Parker, pulled up in his beat-up pickup truck. "Morning, James," Tom called out, killing the engine. "Thought I might find you out here." "Tom." James nodded. "What brings you by so early?" Tom leaned against his truck, crossing his arms, "Wanted to give you a heads up. Bank's been asking questions about your place." Martha heard them talking at her office. James's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "The kind they ask when they're thinking about foreclosure." Tom kicked at a clump of dirt. "Listen, if you need help, I'm fine," James cut him off. He'd never taken charity, wasn't about to start now. Got the fair coming up. Should bring in enough to make the payments. Tom looked skeptical but knew better than to push. "Well, if you change your mind." He left the offer hanging in the air. James watched Tom drive away, then headed back to the house to get ready for the fair. The kitchen was quiet, too quiet. No radio playing the oldies station Sarah always had on. No coffee brewing, no smell of bacon and eggs. Just empty silence and the ticking of the old wall clock Sarah's mother had given them as a wedding present. He made himself a quick breakfast of toast and coffee, eating standing up at the counter. The house felt too big now. 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a full basement. Way too much space for one person. But Sarah had always wanted a big family. They'd tried for years, but it never happened. Now he rattled around in here like a single penny in an empty jar. By 8 o'clock, James had his truck loaded with what produce he had left from the greenhouse, some winter lettuce, late-season squash, and the preserves Sarah had put up before she got sick. He carefully placed her labeled jars in a box, each one wrapped in newspaper. The sight of her neat handwriting made his throat tight. The county fairgrounds were already bustling when he arrived. He parked in his usual spot and started setting up his stand. The familiar faces of other vendors nodded as they passed, a few stopping to offer condolences he wished they'd stopped giving. 6 months was long enough for sympathy. "Mr. Wilson." A woman's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was probably in her 40s, dressed in business casual that looked out of place among the jeans and flannels of the fair. "I'm Sarah Jenkins from Child Welfare Services. Do you have a moment?" James set down the jar he was arranging. "Something wrong?" She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "I couldn't help but overhear you talking with Tom Parker earlier about your financial situation. I might have a proposition that could help both you and some children in need." James frowned. "Not looking for charity." "This isn't charity," she said quickly. We have a group of sisters, 10 of them, who need a home. They are about to be split up into different foster homes unless we can find someone willing to take them all. Someone with space, experience with responsibility, and a nurturing environment. She gestured at his stand. Someone like you? James stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Me? I'm 65 years old, live alone, and can barely keep my farm afloat. What makes you think I could handle 10 kids? Sarah Jenkins smiled. Because I've been watching you. The way you handle your produce with care, how you remember every customer's name and their preferences, how you've kept this farm running despite everything. These girls need someone who understands loss and knows how to keep going anyway. The morning crowd was starting to file in. James could see his regular customers heading his way. Look, I appreciate the thought, but just think about it, she interrupted, placing her card on his table. The girls are at the New Hope Children's Home. You can visit them anytime. But please don't take too long. We have to make a decision about splitting them up by the end of the month. She walked away, leaving James holding her card and feeling like the ground had shifted under his feet. The rest of the day passed in a blur of transactions and small talk, but his mind kept drifting to that card sitting in his pocket. That night, James sat at his kitchen table, Sarah's card propped against the salt shaker. The house creaked and settled around him, its empty room seeming to echo with possibility. He thought about the bedroom furniture gathering dust upstairs, the swing set in the backyard that had never held children, the dreams he and Sarah had shared of filling this house with family. What would you do, honey? He asked the quiet kitchen. For the first time in 6 months, the silence felt like it might have an answer. James got up and walked through each room of his house, really looking at it for the first time since Sarah died. The spacious living room where they'd planned to put a Christmas tree surrounded by presents. The bedrooms that had waited years for occupants. The big kitchen with its long table that had never held more than 2 place settings. He stopped at Sarah's sewing room, now just another storage space. The moonlight streaming through the window caught the dust motes dancing in the air. 10 girls. The idea was crazy. He was too old, too set in his ways, too broke. But as he stood there in the quiet house, James couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this wasn't just about him anymore. Maybe it wasn't even about Sarah anymore. Maybe it was about 10 kids who needed exactly what he had: space, stability, and a heart big enough to try. He pulled the card from his pocket and looked at the number in the dim light. Tomorrow. He'd make the call tomorrow. For tonight, he had a lot of thinking to do. The old wall clock ticked away in the kitchen, counting down the hours until sunrise, until the next morning's chores, until whatever came next. James sat in his chair by the window, watching the stars well overhead, and for the first time in 6 months, he felt something that felt almost like hope. James parked his truck outside the New Hope Children's Home the next morning. The building was a converted Victorian mansion, its white paint peeling around the edges. His hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to make his knuckles white. What was he doing here? A group of kids played basketball in the front yard, their shouts and laughter carrying through his closed windows. He watched them for a moment, gathering his courage. Finally, he took a deep breath and got out of the truck. Sarah Jenkins met him at the front door, her face lighting up with surprise. "Mr. Wilson, I honestly didn't expect you so soon." "Neither did I," he admitted, following her inside. The interior smelled of cleaning supplies and cooking food. Children's artwork covered the walls, bright splashes of color against institutional beige paint. "The girls are in the common room," Sarah said, leading him down a hallway. "I should warn you, they are a bit wary of new people. Especially," she hesitated, "especially old white men." James finished for her. She gave him a grateful smile. "Yes, they've had some disappointing experiences." They reached a large room filled with mismatched furniture. 10 girls of varying ages sat or stood in a tight cluster, clearly waiting for them. The oldest, a tall teenager with protective stance, stood slightly in front of the others. "Girls," Sarah announced, "this is Mr. Wilson. He's here to meet you." James felt 10 pairs of eyes studying him. He'd faced down angry bulls that made him less nervous. "Hello," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. The oldest girl spoke first. "I'm Jasmine. I'm 16. Her voice carried a clear message. She was in charge here. "Nice to meet you, Jasmine." James stayed where he was, giving them space. "Mind introducing me to your sisters?" Jasmine's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. This is Maya. She's 14. A girl with braids and glasses gave a small wave. Then there's twins Kira and Keisha. They're 12. The twins were identical down to their matching yellow dresses. They pressed against each other, watching him silently. Ashley's 11, Jasmine continued, indicating a girl with a book clutched to her chest. Tiana's 9. A girl with beads in her hair smiled shyly. Zoe's 7. The girl in question was bouncing slightly on her toes, energy barely contained. Destiny's 6, and Faith is 5. Two smaller girls peeked out from behind Jasmine's legs. And that's Hope. She just turned 4. The youngest sister sat on a worn couch, hugging a stuffed elephant. That's quite a family you've got there, James said quietly. We're not splitting up, Jasmine declared, chin raised. So if that's what you're here for, it's not, James interrupted. He slowly lowered himself into a nearby chair, his knee protesting. Actually, I heard you all need to stay together. That true? The girls exchanged glances. Maya stepped forward. Yes, but nobody wants all of us. They say we're too many. James nodded. Well, I've got a farm. 15 acres. Big house with 4 bedrooms and a finished basement. Been pretty empty since my wife passed. He looked at each girl in turn. Might be room for 10 more, if you're interested. Hope, the youngest, suddenly slid off the couch and walked right up to him. She studied his face with serious brown eyes. You got any animals? Got a cow named Betty, James told her. Used to have more, but had to sell them. Got some chickens too. And an old farm dog named Duke. Hope's face lit up. I never seen a real cow before. Hope, Jasmine warned, but the ice was broken. The younger girls started pepper him with questions. What kind of dog is Duke? Can we help with the chickens? Do you grow food like in books? Is there really a basement? James answered each question patiently, watching as the younger girls gradually moved closer. Only Jasmine and Maya kept their distance, whispering to each other with worried faces. Mr. Wilson, Sarah Jenkins interrupted gently. Would you like to see the rest of the facility? He nodded, standing carefully. Be right back, girls. As he followed Sarah out, he heard the excited chatter break out behind him. They seem like good kids, he said as they walked. Sarah's face turned serious. They are, but you should know their background. Their mother died in childbirth with Hope. Father couldn't cope, started drinking. There was neglect, some abuse. Jasmine basically raised the younger ones until social services got involved 2 years ago. James's jaw tightened. That why they are scared of men? Partly. They've had 3 potential adoptions fall through. Last one was a couple who promised to take them all, then backed out at the last minute. Said it was too much responsibility. She stopped walking and faced him. Mr. Wilson, I have to ask, why are you really here? James was quiet for a long moment. When I was 8, my parents died in a car crash. Got sent to live with my uncle on his farm. Didn't know him, was scared to death. But he took me in, taught me everything I know. He looked out a nearby window at the playing children. Sometimes people just need a chance. Sarah studied him. You know this won't be easy. The adoption committee will have concerns about your age, your financial situation. My age means I've got experience, James interrupted. And the farm might not be making much now, but it's paid for. Got no debts except the operating loan. And these girls? He paused, choosing his words carefully. They know how to work together, how to take care of each other. Maybe they could help bring the farm back too. You'd need to make modifications to the house. Safety inspections, background checks, home studies. Just tell me what needs to be done, James said firmly. I'll handle it. Sarah smiled slowly. Would you like to join the girls for lunch? Get to know them better. James nodded, and they headed back to the common room. The girls were still clustered together, but the atmosphere had changed. The younger one smiled as he entered. Even Jasmine's stance was slightly less defensive. Who wants to show Mr. Wilson the dining room? Sarah asked. Several small hands shot up, but Hope was fastest. She marched up to James and held out her tiny hand. I can show you. I know the way. James solemnly took her hand, his rough palm engulfing her smooth one. Lead on, Miss Hope. The dining room was large and institutional, with long tables and plastic chairs. The girls naturally clustered together at one table, leaving space for James to join them. The lunch was simple: sandwiches, apple slices, and milk. What's it like on a farm? Ashley asked, her book now set aside but still within reach. Lot of work, James answered honestly. Up before dawn every day. Animals need feeding, crops need tending. But there's good things too. Fresh air, space to run, seeing things grow. We know about work, Jasmine said quietly. Had to work plenty before. James met her eyes. Not like that. This would be your home, not a job. You'd be family, not workers. That's what the others said too, Maya pointed out. I'm not the others, James replied simply. I'm just me, an old farmer with too much space and not enough family to fill it. Hope, who had claimed the seat next to him, tugged on his sleeve. Would we all get our own beds? Hope! Jasmine scolded, but James held up a hand. Fair question. Right now I've got 4 bedrooms besides mine. Basement's finished too. Could make a good space for the older girls if they want privacy. Need to get more beds. But there's room. The girls exchanged looks, having one of those silent conversations that close siblings perfect. James let them process, focusing on his sandwich. Why now? Jasmine finally asked. Why us? James set down his sandwich. Because my wife Sarah and I always wanted kids. Never happened for us. She died 6 months ago, and the house has been too quiet since. Yesterday, Ms. Jenkins here told me about 10 sisters who needed a home, and he shrugged. Sometimes things just line up right. But you? Maya hesitated. Old? White? A stranger? James finished. All true. But I'm also honest. Got a safe place for you all, and I'm willing to try if you are. More silent communication passed between the sisters. Finally, Jasmine spoke again. Can we think about it? Of course, James said. I'll come back tomorrow, if that's okay. Bring some pictures of the farm. The younger girls brightened at this, and even Maya looked interested. Jasmine gave a small nod. As James prepared to leave, Hope tugged his sleeve again. Will you really come back tomorrow? James knelt down to her level, ignoring his protesting knee. I promise. She studied him with those serious eyes again, then suddenly hugged him. James froze for a moment, then carefully hugged her back. When he stood, he saw Jasmine watching the interaction with an unreadable expression. But she met his eyes and gave him the smallest of nods. In his truck driving home, James's mind raced with everything that needed to be done. The house would need work. He'd need to sell more equipment to buy beds and dressers. The adoption committee would need convincing. But for the first time in 6 months, his house didn't feel too big anymore. Instead, it felt like it was finally the right size, just waiting for the right people to fill it. The bank manager's office felt too small, too stuffy. James sat in an uncomfortable chair while Mr. Peterson reviewed his financial documents, each flip of paper sounding like a door closing. Mr. Wilson, Peterson said finally, taking off his reading glasses, I'll be direct. Your farm's operating at a loss. You're 3 months behind on your equipment loan. And now you're telling me you want to adopt 10 children. Yes, sir. I am. James kept his voice steady. Peterson leaned back in his chair. How do you plan to support them? Children are expensive, James. Food, clothes, school supplies dash. Got it all figured out, James interrupted, pulling out a worn notebook. Been up 3 nights running the numbers. Got 4,000 saved from selling the tractor. Another 3,000 coming from the hay baler. Don't need it since I'm switching to mostly vegetables. Got buyers lined up for 3 of the field plots dash. You're selling your land. Peterson's eyebrows shot up. 10 acres. Keeping 5 for intensive vegetable farming. More profitable than wheat, especially with help for the labor. James flipped a page in his notebook. Already got contracts with 2 restaurants in town for organic produce. Been doing the math. With 10 acres less to maintain, fuel costs drop 60%. Equipment maintenance drops 70%. Peterson studied him. And the children? Who's going to watch them while you're working? Oldest is 16, next is 14. They're used to helping with the younger ones. And they'll be right there on the farm with me, not left alone. James met Peterson's skeptical look. My wife and I built this farm to be a family home. Now I've got a chance at a family. I'm not asking for a loan, Mr. Peterson. Just asking you to hold off on foreclosure while I make these changes. The banker was quiet for a long moment. 3 months, he said finally. Show me this plan can work in 3 months, or we'll have to revisit the foreclosure option. James nodded, standing up. Thank you, "Sir, James," Peterson called as he reached the door. "Sarah was a good woman. I hope this works out for you." Outside the bank, James checked his watch. Just enough time to get to the home inspection. His truck protested as he started it. Another repair he'd have to postpone. The house looked different through a home inspector's eyes. Every loose floorboard, every aging pipe, every worn carpet became a potential problem. The inspector, a woman named Martinez, took endless notes on her clipboard. "Main structure's solid," she said after 2 hours. "But you'll need significant updates. Smoke detectors in every room. Carbon monoxide detectors. Window guards on the second floor. The basement needs a second exit. Bathroom locks need to be changeable from the outside in case of emergencies." James followed her, noting everything in his notebook. The list grew longer with each room. "And the septic system?" she asked. "Had it inspected last month. Capacity for 15 people." She made another note. "You'll need bedroom furniture for 10 children. Adequate storage. Study spaces. The kitchen's good size, but you'll need more refrigeration. And the yard dash, already ordered fencing materials," James cut in. "Getting installed next week." Martinez looked up from her clipboard. "Mr. Wilson, I'll be honest. Most single parents adopting 10 children, I'd fail them immediately. But you've clearly done your homework." She sighed. "Conditional pass. Get these updates done, and I'll sign off." James's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You've still got the adoption committee to convince." The committee meeting was scheduled for the following week. James spent every spare moment preparing. He sold equipment, ordered supplies, and worked on house repairs until his hands were raw. The community's whispers grew louder. "Did you hear? Old Wilson's trying to adopt 10 kids. Must be going senile after Sarah died. Probably wants cheap labor for that failing farm of his." He ignored them, focused on his list. The only opinion that mattered was the committee's. The day of the meeting arrived hot and humid. James put on his one good suit, the one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral. In his truck's rearview mirror, he straightened his tie with shaking hands. The adoption committee sat behind a long table, 5 people who held his future in their hands. He recognized Sarah Jenkins, but the others were strangers. "Mr. Wilson," the chairman began, "we've reviewed your application. We have concerns." For the next hour, they fired questions at him. "How will you handle medical emergencies? What's your plan for their education? How can you guarantee financial stability? What experience do you have with traumatized children? How will you handle racial and cultural differences?" James answered each question directly, showing them his plans, his budget, his research. When they asked about race, he paused. "Look," he said finally, "I know what you're thinking. Old white farmer wants to adopt 10 black girls. Sounds like something from a bad history book. But I'm not looking at their skin. I'm looking at 10 sisters who need a home and a chance. I've got both to give." "Mr. Wilson," a committee member interrupted, "your wife's death was only 6 months ago. Some might say you're not thinking clearly. Sarah and I tried for 15 years to have children." James cut in, his voice rough. "When she got sick, her biggest regret was leaving me alone. Said no one should live in a house built for family without having one." He took a deep breath. "I'm thinking clearer than I have in months." The committee whispered among themselves. Finally, the chairman spoke. "We'll need to deliberate. Please wait outside." The hallway clock ticked away 30 minutes that felt like 30 years. When they called him back in, James's legs felt wooden. "Mr. Wilson," the chairman began, "this is an unusual situation. Your age is a concern. Your financial situation is precarious. The racial and cultural dynamics are complex." He paused. "However, Ms. Jenkins has been a strong advocate for you. Your preparation is impressive. And most importantly, the girls themselves have expressed interest in the placement." James's heart jumped. "We've decided to approve a preliminary placement. 3 months probationary period. Weekly visits from a social worker. Mandatory counseling for all family members. And all house modifications must be completed before the girls arrive." "When?" James's voice cracked. "When can they come home?" "You have 2 weeks to complete the modifications. Assuming you pass final inspection, the girls can move in after that." James drove home in a daze. 2 weeks. He pulled up to his dark, quiet house. The last time it would be this quiet if everything went right. He walked through each room, mentally checking his list. Smoke detectors. Window guards. Extra beds, new locks, fencing. So much to do, so little time. In Sarah's sewing room, he found her old quilt pieces, still waiting to be assembled. She'd always planned to make quilts for their children. Now, finally, they'd have children to give them to. A knock at the door startled him. It was Tom Parker. Heard about the committee, Tom said without preamble. Martha told me. Listen, some of us been talking. We think you're crazy. He held up a hand as James started to speak. But you're our kind of crazy. We're here Saturday to help with the renovations. No arguments. James stared at his neighbor, throat tight. Tom save it. Just have coffee ready. Gonna be a long day. That Saturday, trucks started arriving at dawn. Farmers, mechanics, carpenters, people he'd known for decades. They carried tools, lumber, supplies. Their wives brought food and extra hands. All right, folks, Tom called out, taking charge. We got 2 weeks to turn this house into a home for 11 people. Let's get to work. The house buzzed with activity. New smoke detectors went up. Window guards were installed. The basement got its second exit. Women organized donated furniture and clothes. Someone's teenage son set up a computer room in the basement. In the kitchen, James found Martha Parker organizing a collection of casserole dishes in his freezer. For your first week, she explained, Lord knows you'll need help feeding 10 growing girls. By sunset, the house had transformed. Not finished, but close. The remaining work would be done by Wednesday. That night, James sat on his porch, looking at the stars. The house behind him was different now, safer, ready for children, ready for family. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Jenkins. Girls are excited. Hope keeps asking when she can meet the cow. James smiled, typing back. Betty's excited too. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until the quiet would be replaced by voices, laughter, life. 2 weeks until his house became a home again. He thought about the obstacles still ahead, the bank's deadline, the community's doubts, the challenges of becoming a father at 65. But for now, sitting in the growing dark, James felt ready. Ready to fill this house with the family it was always meant to hold. The first morning exploded into chaos at 6 a.m. James stood in his kitchen, surrounded by half-spilled cereal boxes, scattered toast, and 10 girls in various stages of breakfast warfare. Faith, stop putting sugar in your sister's hair. Jasmine shouted, trying to wrangle the youngest ones into their seats. But she started it. Faith protested, still wielding the sugar shaker like a weapon. Did not. Destiny shot back, milk dribbling down her chin. James watched the scene unfold, coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth. He thought he was prepared. He wasn't. Mr. Wilson, Maya called from the stove. I think the eggs are burning. The smell hit him just as she spoke. He rushed to salvage what he could, but the scrambled eggs were beyond saving. Black smoke curled up from the pan. It's okay, Maya said, already reaching for more eggs. I can make more. Used to cook for everyone before. She trailed off, and James saw the shadow cross her face. Before their father, before social services, before everything changed. Tell you what, he said, dumping the burnt eggs in the trash. Why don't you show me how you like them done? A small smile touched her lips. Okay. From the table, Hope's voice piped up. When can we see Betty? After breakfast, James promised. But first we need to dash. A crash from the living room cut him off. Ashley's voice called out. Zoe knocked over the bookshelf. Did not. I just bumped it. James took a deep breath. One thing at a time. Maya, you good with the eggs? She nodded, already cracking them into a bowl. In the living room, books lay scattered across the floor. Zoe stood frozen beside the tilted bookshelf, tears welling in her eyes. I didn't mean to, she whispered. Please don't send us back. The words hit James like a physical blow. He knelt down beside her, ignoring his protesting knee. Hey, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. It's just a bookshelf. Books are tough. They can handle a fall. Nobody's going anywhere. Promise. Promise. He held out his hand. Now, want to help me pick them up? By the time they finished restacking the books, Maya had breakfast ready. The kitchen had settled into something resembling order, with Jasmine maintaining peace through sheer force of will. All right, James said once everyone had eaten. Time to learn about the farm. But first, we need rules. 10 faces turned to him, expressions ranging from suspicious to curious. Rule 1. Nobody goes in the barn alone. Too many things that could hurt you. Rule 2. When I say stop, you stop immediately. No questions. Could be a snake, could be machinery, doesn't matter. Stop means stop. Jasmine nodded approvingly. Rule 3. Always tell someone where you're going. Farm's big. Easy to get lost if you're not used to it. Questions? Hope's hand shot up. Can we see Betty now? James couldn't help smiling. Yes, we can see Betty now. Boots by the door. Everybody find your size. The next 10 minutes dissolved into chaos again as 10 girls tried to find and put on boots at the same time. Finally, they were ready. James led them across the yard to the barn, watching as they took in their new home in the morning light. The twins, Kira and Keisha, held hands as they walked. Tiana kept stopping to look at plants. Ashley had somehow already found a book to carry. At the barn door, James stopped them. Remember Rule 1? Nobody goes in alone. We go in together, nice and quiet so we don't spook Betty. He slid the door open, and 10 pairs of eyes widened at the sight of the brown cow contentedly chewing her hay. She's so big, Hope breathed, clutching James's pant leg. Can we pet her? Zoe asked. One at a time, James said. She's gentle, but she's still a 1,000-pound animal. He showed them how to approach from the side, how to let Betty see them coming. One by one, they got to stroke her soft nose or scratch behind her ears. Even Jasmine cracked a smile when Betty licked her hand. Who wants to learn to milk her? James asked. Several hands shot up, but Ashley hung back, nose in her book. Not interested in farming, James asked her quietly while the others took turns trying to milk Betty. She glanced up, then quickly backed down. I like reading better. Nothing wrong with that. You know, that basement room with all the books? That's yours if you want it. Could be a library. Her eyes lit up. Really? Really? Farm needs all kinds. Readers too. The rest of the morning was spent showing them the property. The chicken coop caused another explosion of excitement, especially when James let them collect eggs. Duke, the old farm dog, followed them everywhere, soaking up more attention than he'd gotten in years. But when James tried to show them the vegetable gardens, things went sideways. Okay, everyone take a section, he started to explain. We need to dash. No. The shout came from Jasmine. She stood rigid, fists clenched. We're not your workers. You promised. The younger girls froze. Maya moved closer to Jasmine, protective. James held up his hands. Not workers, family. Family helps each other. But nobody has to do anything they don't want to. That's what he said too, Maya whispered. Before, understanding hit James like a bucket of cold water. Their father had used them for labor. Forced them to work. New rule, he said firmly. Nobody works in the garden unless they want to. Nobody works anywhere unless they want to. This is your home, not a job. Jasmine's shoulders remained tense. What if none of us want to? Then I do it myself, just like before. He met her eyes. I didn't bring you here for free labor, Jasmine. Brought you here for family. Some of the tension left her body, but her eyes were still wary. We'll see. The moment was broken by a scream from the chicken coop. They all ran back to find Hope crying, holding her hand. Chicken pecked me, she wailed. James scooped her up without thinking, checking her hand. Just a small red mark. But to a 4-year-old, it was tragedy. Know what helps chicken pecks? He asked her. She shook her head, sniffling. Ice cream. Hope's tears slowed. Really? Really? Dr. Wilson's special prescription. Think everyone else needs some too, just to be safe. That earned him the first real smile he'd seen from Jasmine all day. The afternoon found them all in the kitchen, ice cream bowls scattered across the table. James watched as the girls gradually relaxed, talking and giggling together. Not perfect. Not yet. But a start. That night, after getting everyone settled, a 2-hour process involving 5 bathroom trips, 3 lost stuffed animals, and 1 monster check under beds, James sat at his kitchen table. The house hummed with unfamiliar sounds, creaking floorboards as someone walked to the bathroom, whispered conversations between sisters, the distant sound of a radio in the teens' basement room. He pulled out his notebook, adding to his growing list, thick squeaky step, Scared Faith more night lights child locks on cleaning supplies find out Ashley's favorite books get Hope child-size garden gloves look up chicken-proofing methods start library organization check if Maya wants cooking lessons a soft sound made him look up. Jasmine stood in the doorway, watching him. Can't sleep? He asked. She shook her head, not used to it being so quiet. James nodded. The children's home had been full of noise, even at night. Want some more milk? Sarah always said it helped. Your wife? Yeah. Jasmine hesitated, then sat at the table. James warmed milk for both of them, adding a touch of honey like Sarah used to. Why are you really doing this? Jasmine asked after a few sips. James considered his answer carefully. Because this house was built for family. Because you girls deserve a home. Because I've got love to give and space to fill. He looked at her. Pick whichever reason makes most sense to you. They're all true. She studied her milk. The others are starting to like it here. But you're not sure yet. I have to be sure, she said quietly. I have to protect them. I know. James reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. She finished her milk in silence, then stood. At the doorway, she paused. Mr. Wilson. Yes. Thank you. For the ice cream today. After she left, James sat in the quiet kitchen, adding one more item to his list. Earn Jasmine's trust. It might be the hardest task yet. But as he listened to his house full of sleeping children, he knew it would be worth it. James's weather-worn hands gripped the morning newspaper tight enough to crumple it. The forecast hadn't changed. Severe storm system moving in, possible tornado conditions, heavy rainfall expected. That looks bad, Maya said from behind him. She'd taken to joining him for early morning coffee, the only other person in the house who liked being up at 5 a.m. Could be, James admitted, setting down the paper. Need to prepare. Maya sipped her coffee, a habit she'd picked up from him over the past month. What can I do to help? Before James could answer, thunder rumbled in the distance. The sound of running feet followed, and Hope burst into the kitchen in her butterfly pajamas. Scared, she announced, launching herself at James. He caught her automatically, something else he'd gotten used to over the past month. Just thunder, sweet pea, he said, settling her on his lap. Storm's coming, that's all. More footsteps announced the arrival of the other girls, drawn by either the thunder or the early morning activity. Jasmine did a quick head count, another habit James had noticed. Is it going to be a bad storm? Tiana asked, pressing her face against the window. James looked at the darkening sky. No point sugarcoating it. Could be. Which means we need to prepare. Everyone old enough gets a job. Little ones stay with Maya in the house. I want to help. Hope protested from his lap. You can help Maya get the emergency supplies ready, James told her. That satisfied her enough to let Jasmine take her. James laid out the jobs. Jasmine and Kira, help me get the animals secured. Keisha and Ashley, clear anything from the yard that could blow around. Tiana and Zoe, help Maya check all the windows are locked. Faith and Destiny, you're on flashlight duty. Make sure every room has one. What about the vegetables? Maya asked, gesturing to their flourishing garden. After the rocky start, several of the girls had taken to gardening, creating their own small plots. We'll cover what we can, James said. But animals come first. They split up just as another rumble of thunder shook the house. James led his team to the barn, where Betty was already restless. Easy girl, he murmured, checking her stall was secure. Jasmine, get the chicken feed. Kira, help me with these gates. The wind picked up as they worked, carrying the smell of rain. James's bad knee throbbed, always did before a big storm. Inside the barn, Jasmine paused in spreading feed. Mr. Wilson? The sky looks weird. James looked out the barn door and felt his stomach drop. The clouds had taken on a greenish tinge, tornado weather. Everyone inside, he shouted. Now! They ran for the house as the first heavy drops fell. Inside, Maya had organized an impressive emergency station, flashlights, batteries, radio, water bottles, and snacks arranged on the kitchen table. Windows are locked, she reported. Little ones are in the basement with blankets and pillows. The lights flickered as wind howled outside. James did another head count, all present. Everyone to the basement, he ordered. Bring the emergency supplies. Maya, grab the weather radio. They'd barely gotten settled when the power went out. 10 flashlight beams immediately clicked on, creating dancing shadows on the basement walls. I don't like it, Faith whispered, clutching her stuffed rabbit. It's okay, Jasmine soothed, pulling her close. We're all together. James turned on the weather radio, its crackly voice filling the basement. Tornado warning for the following counties. Residents should take immediate shelter. A massive thunderclap made several girls jump. Hope crawled into James's lap again, and he felt her trembling. How about a story? He suggested, trying to distract them. Did I ever tell you about the time Betty got into Sarah's vegetable garden? Head shakes all around. Even Jasmine looked interested. Well, it was about 5 years ago. Sarah had just planted her prized tomatoes. He kept talking as the storm raged overhead, spinning out the tale of Betty's garden adventure, complete with sound effects that made the little ones giggle despite their fear. When that story ended, Maya shared one about the time the twins tried to teach themselves to braid hair and got so tangled they had to call for help. The stories continued as hours passed, each girl contributing memories or jokes. James noticed something as they talked. They were becoming more than 10 separate sisters and one old farmer. They were becoming something new, something whole. Around midnight, the storm's fury began to ease. The tornado warning expired, but no one suggested going upstairs yet. Mr. Wilson, Hope's sleepy voice came from his lap. Are the plants okay? We'll check in the morning, Sweet Pea. What if they're not okay? James stroked her hair. Then we'll plant new ones. Together. She yawned. Promise. Promise. One by one, the younger girls drifted off to sleep, curled in blanket nests on the basement floor. The older ones stayed awake, talking quietly. Think the barn's okay? Jasmine asked. Built to last, James assured her. My father put it up himself in '52. Been through worse than this. But as dawn approached and the storm finally passed, James wasn't so sure. The knee that had ached before the storm now throbbed mercilessly. Years of farming had taught him to trust his body's warnings. He eased Hope onto a pile of blankets and stood carefully. Going to check things out. Stay here. I'm coming with you, Jasmine said immediately. Me too, Maya added. He wanted to argue, but the set of their jaws told him it would be useless. These girls had spent too long being responsible to stop now. The three of them climbed the basement stairs and emerged into a gray morning. The house had held, but the yard was a mess of scattered branches and debris. Then they saw the barn. Part of the roof had torn away, exposing the interior to the elements. Rain had soaked the hay stores. The chicken coop had completely toppled, though they could hear indignant clucking from inside. Betty, Maya called anxiously. A familiar moo answered her. The cow was safe in her stall, though wet and unhappy. But it was the garden that made James's heart sink. Their vegetables, lovingly tended for the past month, lay flattened. Hope's little plot of sunflowers was completely destroyed. The bank, Jasmine said quietly. You needed that crop. James didn't answer. He couldn't. The numbers ran through his head. Repairs, replacement supplies, lost income from the ruined vegetables. The bank's 3-month deadline loomed like another storm cloud. Mr. Wilson. Maya's voice was small. What are we going to do? He looked at his 2 oldest girls, seeing the fear they tried to hide. They'd been through so much already, lost so much. We're going to have breakfast, he said firmly. Then we're going to clean up, fix what we can, and figure out the rest together. But no buts. This is what families do. We stick together, especially when things get hard. Maya and Jasmine exchanged a look he couldn't quite read. Then Maya straightened her shoulders. I'll make breakfast, she said. You two check on the chickens. They worked in the growing light, assessing damage and making temporary repairs. The other girls joined them gradually, gasping at the destruction but quickly pitching in to help. Hope stood the longest at her ruined sunflower patch, little hands balled into fists. Sweet Pea. James knelt beside her, knee protesting. Remember what I said last night? She nodded slowly. Get your gloves. We'll plant new ones after breakfast. Her face lit up. Can I plant more this time? Many as you want. Later, watching 10 girls eat pancakes and plan repairs with the same enthusiasm they'd shown for ice cream that first day, James felt something shift in his chest. The storm had destroyed their crops, damaged the barn, and complicated their already precarious situation. But it had also showed him something important. They weren't just surviving together anymore. They were living together, fighting together. They were becoming family. He just hoped it would be enough when the bank came calling. The knock came at 8 a.m. sharp, just as James finished cleaning up the breakfast dishes. He recognized the sharp, official sound, not the casual rap of a neighbor or the excited pounding of children. "Girls," he called out, "remember what we talked about?" 10 faces turned to him, all showing different degrees of anxiety. They nodded. "Social services," Jasmine mouthed, already herding the younger ones into position. James dried his hands and opened the door. A woman he didn't recognize stood there, clipboard in hand, wearing a crisp business suit that looked out of place against the backdrop of the farm. "Mr. Wilson? I'm Patricia Reynolds from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous complaint about possible child labor violations." Behind him, he heard Maya's sharp intake of breath. "Come in, Ms. Reynolds," James said, stepping aside. "We were expecting you." She entered, eyes scanning everything. The house was spotless. They'd spent yesterday cleaning every corner. The girls sat in the living room, doing various quiet activities. Hope was coloring. The twins were reading. Ashley had her nose in a book, as usual. Tiana and Zoe were playing chess. Faith and Destiny were working on a puzzle. Maya was helping with homework, while Jasmine supervised it all. A perfect picture of domestic tranquility. Too perfect. "Maybe. Girls," James said, "this is Ms. Reynolds. She'd like to ask you some questions." Patricia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps we could speak with each child individually." The younger girls looked at Jasmine, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "We can use the kitchen," James suggested. "It's private but still within earshot." "That won't be necessary," Patricia said. "I'll interview them in my car." "Standard procedure." James felt his chest tighten, but kept his voice steady. "I'm afraid I can't allow that. Their previous trauma is precisely why we need to ensure they can speak freely." She consulted her clipboard. "The complaint suggests you're using these children as unpaid farm labor, that you adopted them specifically for this purpose." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. James clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. "That's not true." Hope burst out, abandoning her coloring. "Daddy James lets us help if we want to, but we don't have to." "Hope," Jasmine warned quietly, but the little girl wasn't finished. "I like feeding the chickens. And Betty. And my sunflowers are growing again after the storm. Want to see." Patricia made a note on her clipboard. "And how many hours per day do you work, Hope?" "I don't work. I play. Sometimes I help collect eggs, but only when I want to. Mostly I read with Ashley in the library or help Maya cook or play with Duke." "Duke?" "Our dog," James explained. "Look, Ms. Reynolds, I understand you have concerns. But these girls have been through enough. Whatever you need to ask, you can ask here, where they feel safe." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Wilson, if you're attempting to influence their testimony his not," Jasmine interrupted, standing up. "And we're not talking to you alone. We did that before, with our father. Told them everything was fine because we were scared. Not doing that again." The room went silent. Jasmine had never spoken about their father before, not to James or anyone else. "Yeah," Maya added, also standing. "You want to know if we're being forced to work? We're not. Want to know if we're happy? We are. Want to know if we feel safe? For the first time in forever? Yes. Mr. Wilson lets me read all day if I want." Ashley piped up. "He made the basement into a library just for me. He bought me special gloves for gardening," Tiana added. "But I only garden when I feel like it. He makes sure we do our homework first," Kira said. "And he never yells," Keisha finished. "He gave us choices," Zoe declared. "Real ones." Faith and Destiny nodded vigorously in agreement. Patricia looked overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring. She turned to James. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Jasmine said firmly. "Whatever you have to say it to all of us. We're family now." James felt his throat tighten at her words. Family. She'd never said that before. Patricia sighed, lowering her clipboard. The complaint came from someone in town. They were concerned about seeing children working in the fields. "You mean last Saturday?" Maya asked. "When we were all out planting the new vegetables after the storm." "That was a family project," James explained. "After we lost the crop, everyone wanted to help replant. But nobody was forced." "I have pumpkins," Hope announced proudly. "My very own patch." A ghost of a real smile touched Patricia's lips. I see. She looked around the room again, but with different eyes this time. Saw the books scattered everywhere. The art supplies. The chess set. The family photos already filling the walls. Mr. Wilson, she said finally, would you mind showing me around? The whole property. The tour took over an hour. They showed her everything. The barn being repaired, the new vegetable gardens with their carefully labeled plots, the chicken coop rebuilt better than before. The girls tagged along, eager to show off their projects and spaces. In the barn, Betty lowered a greeting, and Hope ran to hug her neck. See, she's my friend. They all are, James said quietly to Patricia. The animals, the plants, each other. They're healing here, finding peace. I'd never do anything to harm that. Patricia made one final note on her clipboard, then closed it. I'll be submitting my report today. I don't foresee any further need for investigation. The relief in the room was palpable. However, she continued, I would recommend documenting their activities. Photos, journals, that sort of thing. For your protection. And theirs. James nodded. Already started. Maya's been taking pictures of everything. Got 3 albums filled already. Good. Patricia smiled. A real one this time. You've built something special here, Mr. Wilson. All of you have. After she left, they gathered in the kitchen. The tension of the morning left everyone hungry. Pancakes, Maya suggested, already reaching for the flour. Again, James teased. That's 3 times this week. Pancakes are happy food, Hope declared with 4-year-old wisdom. And we're happy, right? Right, Jasmine confirmed, helping Maya gather ingredients. James watched his family move around the kitchen, the rhythm of it now familiar and precious. Maybe that's what the town couldn't understand. This wasn't about work or profits or free labor. It was about healing, growing, becoming. Mr. Wilson. Jasmine's voice pulled him from his thoughts. We need more eggs. I'll get them. Hope volunteered. Not alone, James and Jasmine said together, then shared a smile. I'll go with her, James said. Been meaning to check on the new hens anyway. Outside, Hope's small hand slipped into his as they walked to the chicken coop. The morning sun lit up her face, so different from the scared little girl he'd met 2 months ago. Daddy James, she said suddenly. Yes, sweet pea. Can I just call you Daddy now? James stopped walking, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. If you want to. She beamed up at him. I want to. From the house came the sound of laughter, the clatter of cooking, the everyday music of family life. Looking at Hope smile, feeling the trust in her small hand in his, James knew that no inspection, no storm, no challenge could break what they'd built here. They were Wilsons now, all of them. And Wilson stuck together, no matter what. James sat at the kitchen table, bills spread out before him like a losing hand of cards. The bank's deadline loomed just 2 weeks away. The storm damage had eaten through their savings, and the replanted crops wouldn't yield in time. Family meeting, he announced finally. 10 heads turned toward him. They'd been doing homework at the big table, something that still amazed him, how they could all work together in comfortable chaos. Is it about money? Jasmine asked directly. She'd gotten good at reading his face over the past months. Yes, James admitted. No point sugarcoating it. Bank wants their payment. Storm set us back. Need to figure something out. Maya closed the textbook. How much do we need? Maya dash. How much? James sighed. 15,000 by the end of the month. Another 10,000 in 3 months. The girls exchanged looks. They'd gotten good at that too. Silent conversations that spoke volumes. What about the farmer's market? Ashley suggested, looking up from her book. We could sell stuff. Already planned on it, James said. But regular produce won't bring in enough. Then we need something different, Maya said slowly. Something special. Hope perked up. Like my pumpkins. Actually, Maya's eyes lit up. Yeah, exactly like your pumpkins. Mr. Wilson, Daddy, what if we did specialty organic produce? Not just regular vegetables. Jasmine caught on. The fancy restaurants in town are always looking for unique ingredients. I heard Mrs. Parker talking about it. And we could do jams, Tiana added excitedly. Like the ones in Sarah's recipes. James looked at his girls, something warm growing in his chest. It's a lot of work. We're not scared of work, Jasmine said firmly. Not when it's for family. The next morning found them gathered around the kitchen table again, but this time with notebooks and Sarah's old recipe box. Okay, Maya said, taking charge. We need to be organized. What can we sell right now? What can we plant for quick harvest? And what's our long-term plan? They divided tasks according to skills and interests. Maya would handle the cooking and preserving, using Sarah's recipes. The twins took inventory of their current crops. Ashley researched specialty vegetables online. Tiana and Zoe designed labels with Hope's artistic input. What about me? Faith asked, not wanting to be left out. You and Destiny are our taste testers, James told her seriously. Very important job. The next week passed in a blur of activity. They converted part of the barn into a commercial kitchen, passing inspection with flying colors. Maya proved to have a natural talent for preserving, her jams coming out perfect every time. Just like Sarah's, James said after tasting her first batch, his voice rough with emotion. The farmer's market became their testing ground. They set up their stand with samples of their specialty products, baby vegetables for restaurants, unique herb blends, Maya's preserves, even Hope's precious pumpkins. Try this, Zoe would say to customers, offering tastes of Maya's blackberry jam. Our sister made it from wild berries we picked ourselves. The response surprised them all. People loved the personal touch, the family story. Restaurant owners stopped by, interested in the specialty produce. Orders started coming in. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. We need something bigger, Jasmine said one evening, after counting the day's earnings. Something to bring in customers faster. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Hope was dozing in James's lap, tired from a day of helping in the garden. What about a festival? Ashley suggested, looking up from her book. I was reading about farm tourism. People love that stuff. James stroked Hope's hair, thinking. Harvest festival's coming up next month. We could host it here, Maya said excitedly. Show people what we're doing. Get advance orders for holiday products. The idea took root and grew. They spent evenings planning, each girl contributing ideas. The twins wanted hay rides. Tiana suggested a petting zoo with Betty as the star. Zoe and Faith wanted face painting. Hope insisted on a pumpkin patch tour. Word spread through town. Some people were skeptical. The old Wilson place, hosting a festival? But others remembered Sarah's hospitality, her dream of a lively family farm. The day of the festival dawned clear and cool. James stood in the yard at sunrise, watching his girls set up. Jasmine directed traffic with the confidence of a seasoned event planner. Maya's preserves filled an entire table, jars glinting in the morning light. The twins led Duke on practice hay ride routes. Ashley had set up a reading corner for children, complete with farm-themed books. Ready? Maya asked, appearing beside him. Ready as we'll ever be. People started arriving at 10. By noon, the farm was packed. Children ran between activity stations, faces painted like farm animals. Parents browsed Maya's preserves and placed holiday orders. Restaurant owners toured the specialty gardens, impressed by the variety. Your girls did all this? Tom Parker asked, sampling a jar of peach preserves. We did it together, James corrected. Hope tugged his sleeve. Daddy, the pumpkins. She led him to her patch, where a line of children waited to pick their own pumpkins. Her face glowed with pride as she explained how she'd grown them from seeds. That's my daughter, he told an admiring parent, the words feeling natural now. By sunset, they were exhausted but triumphant. The holiday orders alone would cover most of the bank payment. Regular contracts with restaurants would handle the rest. We did it, Jasmine said quietly, helping count the day's earnings. We actually did it. Was there ever any doubt? Maya teased, but her eyes were wet. The little ones had crashed on the porch swing, worn out from excitement. James looked at his family, really looked at them. Jasmine, finally letting herself relax into the role of sister instead of parent. Maya, finding her calling in Sarah's old recipes. The twins, their identical faces smudged with face paint. Ashley, reading to her younger sisters. All of them together, making something new from what was broken. Mr. Wilson. The bank manager's voice startled him. He hadn't even seen Peterson arrive. John, he acknowledged, tension returning. Come to check on your investment. Peterson surveyed the scene, the successful festival, the thriving gardens, the sleeping children, the stack of orders. Came to see a miracle, more like. He pulled out an envelope. New loan terms, lower interest rate, extended payment schedule. If you're interested. James stared at the envelope. Why? Peterson smiled. Because you've proven you can adapt. And because Sarah would have loved this. All of it. Later that night, after everyone was in bed, James sat on the porch alone. The festival cleanup could wait until tomorrow. Right now, he just wanted to sit with the feeling of victory, of family, of home. Can't sleep? Jasmine's voice came from the doorway. Too happy to sleep, he admitted. She sat beside him, quiet for a moment. I was wrong. You know, when we first came, I thought this was too good to be true. And now I think some things are just meant to be. Like 10 sisters finding a father who needed daughters. James wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and for the first time, she didn't stiffen at the touch. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on us. Never, he promised. We're Wilsons now. All of us. Inside, the house settled into its nighttime creaks and sighs, sounds that no longer seemed lonely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures. But tonight, under the stars, James Wilson sat with his oldest daughter and knew with absolute certainty that everything would be all right. They were home. They were family. They were whole. 1 year. James could hardly believe it had been 1 year since 10 girls had walked into his quiet house and turned it into a home. He stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the controlled chaos of a typical morning. Faith, your lunch, Maya called, holding up a paper bag. And Destiny, don't forget your permission slip. Has anyone seen my history book? Ashley asked, searching under newspapers and breakfast plates. Check the porch, Jasmine answered, braiding Hope's hair. You were reading out there last night. A year ago, this would have overwhelmed him. Now it was just a morning symphony at the Wilson farm. Daddy, Hope called, squirming under Jasmine's careful hands. Don't forget. My class is coming today. How could I forget? James smiled. Hope's first-grade class was touring the farm as part of their agriculture unit. She'd been talking about it for weeks. The school bus would arrive at 10. Before that, they had the morning chores and preparations to handle. The farm looked different now, more organized, more productive. The specialty gardens had expanded, with neat signs identifying each section. Maya's commercial kitchen gleamed in the converted barn space. Even Betty had a new, larger store. Girls, James called over the breakfast din. Remember your jobs for the tour. Maya and I are doing the cooking demonstration, Jasmine confirmed. At 17, she'd grown into a confident young woman, finally able to be a sister instead of a surrogate mother. Twins are handling the animal stations, Maya added, finally catching Faith to hand over her lunch. Ashley's doing story time in the library corner, Tiana piped up. And I'm helping with the pumpkins, Hope declared proudly. Her patch had grown into a proper pumpkin field, becoming one of their most popular attractions. The yellow school bus appeared right on schedule, disgorging 20 excited first graders and their teachers. Hope bounced on her toes as her classmates arrived. Welcome to Wilson Family Farm, she announced, just like they'd practiced. I'm Hope Wilson, and this is my daddy and my sisters. James's heart swelled at the casual way she claimed them all. No more hesitation, no more fear. Just family. The tour started in the gardens, where Tiana and Zoe showed the children different vegetables growing. These are baby carrots, Zoe explained. Real ones, not the kind from the store. In the barn, the twins introduced Betty and the chickens. Our sister Maya uses their eggs to make the best cookies, Kara told the wide-eyed kids. And my daddy built this whole barn, Keisha added proudly. Maya and Jasmine's cooking demonstration was a hit. They showed the class how to make simple jam, letting each child stir the pot under supervision. Our mom Sarah taught us this recipe through her cookbook, Maya explained, the word mom coming naturally now when she talked about Sarah. In the library corner, Ashley read farm stories to the children. The basement room had transformed over the year, with comfortable reading nooks and shelves of books. My daddy made this space just for me, she told her audience, but I share it with everyone now. At the pumpkin patch, Hope was in her element. Every pumpkin starts as a tiny seed, she explained, showing her classmates the different stages of growth. Just like families can grow from nothing too. James watched it all, remembering the scared, uncertain girls who'd arrived a year ago. Now Jasmine smiled easily, her shoulders relaxed. Maya had found her calling in the kitchen, already talking about culinary school. The twins had grown 3 inches and developed distinct personalities while remaining inseparable. Ashley's library had expanded to 2 rooms. Tiana and Zoe had started a successful YouTube channel about kid-friendly gardening. Faith and Destiny were thriving in school, no longer afraid to stand out. And Hope bloomed like her beloved pumpkins, secure in the knowledge that she was loved. After the school bus departed, they gathered for lunch. These shared meals had become sacred time, a chance to connect during busy days. "My friend said our farm is cool," Hope announced, mouth full of sandwich. "Hope, swallow first," Jasmine reminded her automatically. "Sorry, but they did." "Ginny wants to come back for the fall festival." The fall festival had become their signature event, growing bigger each year. Local businesses now competed for vendor spots. "Speaking of festivals," Maya said, sharing a look with her sisters, "we have something to show you, Daddy." James raised an eyebrow as Jasmine disappeared upstairs, returning with a large wrapped package. "Early birthday present," she explained, setting it before him. Inside was a photo album, but not like the ones they usually kept. This one was leather-bound, professionally made. The cover read, "The Wilson Family, Our First Year." James opened it with trembling hands. The first photo showed them all on moving day, stiff and uncertain beside the moving truck. Then came the progression, their first breakfast together, Hope's first meeting with Betty, the storm cleanup, the inspection day, the festival preparations. Each photo showed them growing closer, becoming family. "Look at the last page," Maya urged softly. The final photo had been taken yesterday, all of them on the porch swing and steps, laughing at something now forgotten. Below it was a document James recognized, the final adoption papers, officially making them all Wilsons. "When did these come?" he asked, voice rough. "Yesterday," Jasmine said. "We wanted to surprise you." "Best birthday present ever," James managed. "That's not all," Maya said. "Show him, Hope." Hope proudly held up a drawing, 11 stick figures in front of a house and barn. "It's for your office. See, there's you, and Jasmine, and Maya, and the twins." James studied the drawing, taking in the details. Hope had given Betty a spot in the picture, and Duke too. Even the pumpkin patch made an appearance. "Perfect," he declared, going right on the wall. They spent the afternoon doing routine farm work, but there was a festive feeling in the air. The girls kept exchanging secret smiles, and James pretended not to notice them whispering and giggling. At dinner, Maya outdid herself, cooking all his favorites. The table groaned under dishes that combined his traditional taste with her innovative touches. "Speech," Zoe called out as they finished eating. James looked around at his family, his daughters. A year ago, he'd been a lonely old farmer with too much space and too many memories. "Now, not good at speeches," he said gruffly. "But I want you all to know something. A year ago, I thought I was helping you girls by giving you a home. Turns out you were helping me just as much. You made this house live again. Made me live again. You gave us more than a home," Jasmine said quietly. "You gave us a father. A real one. And sisters," Hope added. "All together." "Together," James agreed, his heart full. "That's what matters." Later, after the younger ones were in bed, James sat on the porch with Jasmine and Maya. The night was cool, crickets chirping in the darkness. "You know," Maya said, "I've been thinking about Sarah's recipes. About maybe expanding the business, doing online orders. I could help with the website," Jasmine offered. "Been learning coding in school." James listened to them plan, these daughters who'd brought his farm back to life. Sarah would have loved this, he thought. Would have loved them. A small figure appeared in the doorway, Hope in her butterfly pajamas. "Can't sleep?" James asked. She shook her head, climbing into his lap like she still did when tired or worried. "Thinking about tomorrow." "What's tomorrow?" "More stories. More growing. More family stuff." She yawned. "Never want it to end." "It won't, sweet pea," James promised, holding her close. "This is just the beginning." The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over this farm for generations. But now they shone down on something new, a family forged from loss and hope, growing strong like Hope's pumpkins, like Maya's recipes, like love itself. 5 years had passed since James Wilson opened his door to 10 sisters who needed a home. Now he stood in the high school auditorium, watching his oldest daughter adjust her graduation cap in the mirror. "It's crooked," Jasmine complained, fussing with the tassel. "It's perfect," James assured her, his voice rough with emotion. At 21, she'd grown into a confident young woman, already accepted to business school with plans to expand the family farm's operations. "Jasmine," Hope's voice carried across the crowded space. His youngest daughter, now 9, weaved through the crowd clutching a bouquet of sunflowers. "Maya says these are from all of us." Maya, at 19, had become the farm's head of operations, turning their small family business into a thriving enterprise. Her preserves now shipped nationwide, and she'd recently been featured in a cooking magazine. "Don't forget this," Kara said, as she and Keisha appeared with a small box. The 17-year-old twins had their own successful line of organic beauty products made from farm ingredients. Group photo. Ashley called out. At 16, she turned the basement library into a popular reading program for local kids, sharing her love of books with a new generation. Tiana and Zoe, 15 and 13 now, were filming everything for their farm's YouTube channel, which had over 100,000 subscribers. Faith and Destiny, both 11, wore matching dresses they'd helped Maya pick out for the occasion. "Daddy," Hope tugged his sleeve, a habit she'd never outgrown. "Are you crying?" "Just proud," James said, wiping his eyes. At 70, he'd seen all his daughters grow into amazing young women, each finding their own path while staying connected to the farm and family. "Everyone ready?" Maya called out. "They are lining up the graduates." James watched as his family arranged themselves around Jasmine for photos. 5 years ago, they'd been strangers. Now they moved in perfect sync, a unit forged by love and time. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of speeches and names. When they called Jasmine Wilson, his entire row erupted in cheers. Hope's voice carried above the rest. "That's my big sister." Afterward, they gathered at the farm for a celebration. The property had transformed over the years. The barn now housed Maya's commercial kitchen and the twins' production space. The gardens had expanded to include specialty herbs and flowers. Hope's original pumpkin patch had grown into a popular seasonal attraction. "Remember our first harvest festival?" Maya asked, setting out platters of food on the long picnic tables they'd set up outside. "How could I forget?" James chuckled. "We were so nervous about making enough money for the bank payment. Now we have waiting lists for our events," Jasmine added proudly. She'd taken over the business side of things, turning their small farm into a destination. "Miss Sarah would be proud," a voice said behind them. They turned to find Tom Parker and his wife Martha approaching with gifts. "She is proud," Hope declared with certainty. "She watches us from heaven, right, Daddy? Right, Sweet Pea?" James had told them all about Sarah over the years, sharing stories and recipes until she felt like a mother they'd known rather than one they'd missed. The party grew as neighbors and friends arrived to celebrate. The farm had become a community hub, hosting events and bringing people together. Even the bank manager, Peterson, showed up with his grandchildren. "Quite a change from 5 years ago," he commented to James, watching the girls host their guests with natural grace. "Best investment I ever made," James replied, and they both knew he wasn't talking about money. As evening approached, Maya called everyone to attention. Time for the surprise. James found himself guided to a special chair decorated with streamers. His daughters gathered around him, each holding something. 5 years ago, Jasmine began. "You took a chance on 10 scared girls who needed a home. You taught us about farming," Maya continued, "but more importantly, about family." The twins stepped forward with a large photo album. "We've been collecting memories," they said together. Inside, James found photos from the past 5 years, birthdays, holidays, ordinary moments made special by sharing them together. Each daughter had written messages beside the pictures. "But that's not all," Ashley said, presenting a thick stack of papers. James read the top page and his heart stopped. It was incorporation paperwork for Wilson Family Farms, LLC, with all 11 of their names listed as owners. "We want to make it official," Jasmine explained. "The farm belongs to all of us now. A true family business. Maya's preserves, the twins' products, Ashley's reading program, the YouTube channel, it's all under one umbrella now," Tiana added. "And look," Hope bounced forward with a sign she'd painted. "Wilson Family Farms, growing love since 2025." James stared at his daughters, his family, through tears. When did you all grow up so fast? You taught us how, Jasmine said softly, hugging him. By loving us, trusting us, believing in us. One by one, they joined the hug until James was surrounded by his daughters. The sun set behind them, painting the sky in colors that reminded him of that first morning, when he'd stood alone in his fields wondering if he was crazy to take on such a challenge. Later that night, after the party wound down and the younger girls were in bed, James sat on the porch with Jasmine and Maya, a tradition they'd maintained over the years. Nervous about business school? He asked Jasmine. A little, she admitted. But Maya's got the farm running smoothly, and everyone knows their roles now. We've come a long way from that first storm, Maya mused. Remember how scared we were about losing everything? Now look at us. Jasmine gestured to the thriving farm around them. Who would have thought? I did, a small voice said. They turned to find Hope in the doorway, another tradition that hadn't changed. I knew right away Daddy would keep us safe. James opened his arms and she climbed into his lap, not too big for cuddles yet. And you were right, Sweet Pea. Tell the story again, Hope requested sleepily. About how we became a family. Well, James began, sharing a smile with his older daughters. It started one day at the county fair when a social worker told me about 10 sisters who needed a home. As he told the familiar tale, James looked out over his farm. Their farm now. The gardens Maya tended with such care. The barn where the twins created their products. Ashley's library lights still on as she finished one more chapter. The YouTube studio Tiana and Zoe had built in the old storage room. The pumpkin patch Hope had started with such determination. 5 years ago, he'd been a lonely old farmer with too much space and too many memories. Now he was father to 10 amazing daughters, each one bringing her own gifts to their shared life. And that's how 11 people who were alone found each other. He finished the story. And lived happily ever after. Hope mumbled, nearly asleep. No, Sweet Pea, James corrected gently. We're still living it. Every single day. Jasmine and Maya nodded, understanding in their eyes. They'd all grown up on this farm, James included. Grown together, healed together, become something new together. The stars shone overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning. But now they watched over a family complete and whole, rooted in love as deep as the earth itself. James Wilson held his youngest daughter, surrounded by his oldest ones, and knew with absolute certainty that this, all of this, was exactly what Sarah had dreamed of for their home. Not just a farm, but a family. Not just a house, but a heart. And in the quiet of the evening, with crickets chirping and Hope's gentle breathing and his older daughter's soft conversation, James Wilson was completely, perfectly at peace. They were the Wilsons, and they were home.